Okay. Well, this is good. I'll be walking back and forth in front of my own projection, but never mind. Welcome. So today's talk is about the singularity. How many of you have ever heard of the concept of the singularity? Everyone. So almost all of this is going to be boring to you and you should leave now. All right. So this is our motivating slide. This is from an essay by Werner Vinge that coined the term the singularity that he wrote back in 1993. Within 30 years, we will have the technological means to create superhuman intelligence. Shortly after, the human era will be ended. And this is kind of the motivation for the whole talk. What the hell did he mean by this? And was he correct? And of course, you know, what does that mean for those of us who are not AIs the size of Jupiter? But anyway, part one, acceleration. So, this is an object that if you go to the British Museum in London, you will see in a nice display case that is labeled the oldest artifact in the British Museum. It is a stone tool found in the Olduvai Gorge. It has been dated to 1.8 million years ago or so. It is from the dawn of the invention of tools. This was not created by a Homo sapiens. You are all Homo sapiens. This was created by a Homo erectus or a Homo habilis, one of our ancestors. So long before there were human beings, like we know human beings, if the people could be a little quiet in the back, please, thanks. Long before there were, I'm talking to you, yes. Long before there were human beings, we were starting to build tools. In fact, tools are probably the reason that we are human beings the way we are. The fact that we started building tools meant that we started getting natural selection for power grips, for fine motor control, the sorts of things chimpanzees don't have. About 200,000 years ago, what the hell is that?
The distraction's working.
Well, it's over. Okay, 200,000 years ago, which is 1/10 of the amount of time since we started building tools, we start getting Homo sapiens, people that look like you and me. Well, hopefully not too much like us, but anyway. 200,000 years ago, 1/10 the amount of time that we've had tools, there have been people as such. 1/20th of the amount of time that there have been people, we have had agriculture, one of the most important inventions of all time. But an even more important invention has only existed for half of the amount of time that we've had agriculture, and that's writing. Before writing, anything you knew and that other people didn't remember that you said was lost forever. Writing allows a kind of immortality. We still have the Epic of Gilgamesh because someone wrote it down. It doesn't matter that it was put down something like 3,500 years ago, we still have the text. We don't even know who wrote it down, but we've still got it. Writing is one of the most important things ever, both because it grants immortality to your ideas and because you don't have to remember everything yourself. Mike Finger is here somewhere. I am sure that the only way that he managed to plan Porcfest was by putting down long lists of things. It's all up there. Well, Mike's an unusual guy, but when I plan stuff like this with hundreds of to-do items, I write them down. You couldn't do that without this. Not long after, and I don't think it's that much of a coincidence, the bronze, one of the first real important material science innovations for the human race, appears. That's 5,300 years ago. 3,500 years ago, a couple thousand years later, we finally figure out how to smelt iron. And that's a big change because iron will take a hard, durable edge. 1,800 years ago, we get the first books as such, codices. Okay, before that, people wrote things down on clay tablets and then on scrolls, which were inconvenient. You couldn't keep large amounts of information in a compact space. Then we invented these. And then we invented the first real breakthrough in information technology since writing, which is printing, the automation of the duplication of ideas. So now it's not just what you manage to write down, but you can make millions of copies of what you've written down. Your words can really live forever because it isn't just whether the 5 copies people have managed to make survive. It's, it's something we can automate, something we can reproduce. This is the next thing on my greatest hits list. 393 years ago, this book was published by a guy named Francis Bacon. How many of you have heard of this book before? A bunch of you. Yes, this is the book that invented something called the scientific method. He is the first person to articulate the idea that we get knowledge through conducting experiments and that we exclude possibilities by conducting experiments and, the whole rest of the apparatus. This is the next big thing. So the stone tool let us stop relying on what we were born with to be able to build and manipulate the world around us. We started, if you're a cat, all you've got are your teeth and your claws. If you are a human being, you can pick up a hammer, you can pick up a screwdriver. We invented tools. This, however, is a new kind of tool entirely. This is the idea that it's not just your muscles or the muscles of animals anymore. That if we need more force, we can build machines that give us more force. By the way, keep noticing the gap between the years keeps getting shorter and shorter. This is something most of you probably haven't heard of. How many of you have heard of Henry Maudslay? If you haven't, you should know who this man is, because he is the reason that we have most modern machine tools. Someone else would have come up with it eventually, of course. But this is one of his most important inventions. Before Maudslay, if you wanted a screw, you made the screw by hand using hand tools, and it had to be fitted to a single tapped hole. Every screw was unique to that tapped hole. You could not mass produce screws. If you wanted to move an armature on a machine tool, left or right, you could not do it precisely, because the way you do that is with threaded shafts and turning threaded shafts certain numbers of times. Everything that you need to make machine tools and to make modern equipment, modern steam engines, steamboats, railroad engines, all the rest, required the stuff that Maudslay invented. Maudslay didn't only invent this, he invented a bunch of lathes and mills. He is the father of modern machining. Okay, 19th century, just after that, stuff starts happening so fast that I can barely cover even a fraction of it. The Jacquard loom shows up in 1801, which lets people automate the manufacture of patterned fabric. Steamships are first invented in 1807. Railroads were experimented with for about 20 or 30 years before this, but the first commercial railroad is somewhere around 1825. By 1831 or so, people are experimenting with electric motors. By the 1830s, people are experimenting with telegraphs. And here, I could keep on going, but we would start filling slide after slide with item after item coming one year after another. Our first gap, was 1,800,000 years. Our second gap was 180,000 years. And we're starting getting down to the point where critical inventions are happening year after year after year after year. How many people know what Moore's law is? Everyone, so I won't belabor it. But what Moore said is that the number of transistors on a computer chip double every 18 months. Many people don't think of what that really means, so I'm going to express it differently. Every 18 months, we make as much progress on the manufacturing of computer chips as we have made in human history to date. Last year we could put 1 billion transistors on. This year we can put 2 billion transistors on. That means that we have added as much capability as we had throughout all of history up to that time, every 18 months. And of course, this creates, a certain amount of change. So the object on the left, on the left here is the way that I interacted with my first computer. This is an ASR 33 terminal. It's a teletype. It does 10 characters per second, uppercase only. 10 characters per second is really damn slow by current views. This was about 1978 that I was playing with one of these things. And today, of course, I've got one of these in my pockets, though mine is black. It's a very large difference. And this has happened in 35 years. And this is not just a change in quantity, this is a change in kind, okay? So in 1978, what I was talking to with that ASR33 was a refrigerator-sized object called a PDP-8 that had 4,096 12-bit, not 8-bit words of memory, which is not enough space for one of the icons on my Mac desktop. You cannot store an icon on your Mac desktop. Oh, we lost it for a moment, it came back. You cannot store an icon in 4K. Okay, the size of a fridge, okay? And the way that you used it was one of those ASR33s. Now, in my pocket, I've got a thing with a gig of main memory and 64 gigs of secondary storage, and, you know, and it talks to the internet wherever I walk, and, you know, it's a damn amazing piece of equipment, and this is half a human lifetime, less than half a human lifetime, okay? Now, how did I write this talk, okay? I wrote this talk sitting in the corner over there with this device, which is even more powerful, and because it doesn't have a built-in, you know, connection to the internet, I had this thing, which is unimaginable. Okay, so the first connection to the internet I used was a refrigerator-sized thing built by Bolt, Beranek, and Newman called an IMP, which communicated at 56 kilobaud out over a leased line from Columbia University to the rest of the world. Now I've got a thing in my pocket the size of a pack of cigarettes that communicates to the internet at megabits per second, and it's got most of the space inside it is for the battery. Okay? Now, whether you notice it or not, we have had a revolution. And it's very difficult often to notice revolutions if you're part of them because you're swimming in it, it's happening every day around you, you don't take a step back, you don't think about it too much. But I'd like to argue that this is really extreme. And I'd like you to think about the following thought experiment just to understand how extreme it is. Imagine that you bring someone from 1963 to the present and show them a recent headline from an ordinary newspaper that explains that a couple of teenagers have gotten in trouble for filming themselves having sex with each other and posting it to Facebook. And you want to explain this to someone from 1963, less than a human lifetime ago. How do you even begin? Okay? You've got cellular phones that are there weren't video cameras, okay? There weren't cell phones, there wasn't an internet, there wasn't Facebook, the idea of having, like, none of these, the idea that teenagers might be having sex, okay? All of these things have happened in less than a human lifetime, okay? And you don't think about it. You wander around every day, you buy your groceries, it doesn't occur to you that things are happening at an insane rate right now. But they are, okay? So why is this happening? Why are we getting accelerating change? Is this some sort of accident? Is it arbitrary? And of course you can guess the answer because I wouldn't be bothering to give the talk if it was an accident. You know, of course it's not an accident. The deal is that technology builds on technology. We got the first tools 2 million years ago, which meant that we were no longer dependent on our bodies for everything that we had to do. If you can never, none of you, I bet, no matter how strong and cool you are not going to drive a nail into a board without a hammer. Well, maybe a few of you, but you're not going to enjoy it. Okay? And probably the reason we are even here and look the way we do is that we invented tools and all the rest of that stuff. Our technology shaped our evolution already, okay? We invented information storage and retrieval 5,500 years ago, so we're no longer dependent on our memories. Tools let you build better tools. You know, you can't build the case for this computer without machine tools. You need machine tools to build machine tools. You need blast furnaces to produce steel, which you use to produce the machine tools, which you use to mill this. You need electric arc furnaces to make the aluminum to make the case. And once you have tools, though, the tools let you build better tools, which let you build better tools. And then eventually you get to the point where you can build physical labor in the form of things like steam engines or in the form of things like industrial robots, which are used all around you. This thing was built mostly by industrial robots and partially by humans in Shenzhen. But like the case, how many of you have Macs, like a modern Mac Pro or what have you? Isn't it cool how the case is milled out of a single block of aluminum? Have you ever wondered how they do that? They've got a robot called a CNC machine that takes a block of aluminum, cuts it to size, and mills it out. And I'm going to show you an example of one in a couple of minutes. The next step after all of this is we're going to start to be able to build minds. So anyway, part 2, generalizations of technology, okay? So one of the themes in human progress so far has been that we've been going from really specific tools, and by the way, I really hate the fact that that's not a ligature, sorry. We've been going from really, really specific tools to general tools, okay? So computers are this amazing thing that generalizes the idea of information processing. And they got motivated originally by people wanting to do stuff like add things. I mean, the first computers were used for things like calculating ballistic tables and breaking German war ciphers. Like one of the first real computers was this thing called the Colossus that was built at Bletchley Park for breaking the German Tunney cipher. But once we had invented these things, it turned out that you could do anything with them that you could express as a series of steps that could be carried out mechanically. Anything. You know, when people invented computers, they were not thinking about Facebook, they were not thinking about iPhones. And in fact, when you buy an iPhone, you don't think about the specific things you're going to do about it. You think of it as a general tool. You have the expectation that 6 weeks from now, someone's going to tell you about a cool app that does something you have never heard of being done before. You will download it in 30 seconds from wherever you are standing and start using it immediately. It is a generalized tool. It is not a specific tool. It is a tool that is not for something in particular. It is a tool that's for everything. The internet is similarly a generalized tool, okay? The internet started as a sort of replacement for all of these sorts of different devices, okay? It's a way, you know, I mean, some people use it as a telephone and some people use it for moving data around, and you can use it for watching cat videos on YouTube. But the technology, and this is a terrible representation of the technology, but, you know, sue me. And if you do so in a private court. But anyway, the internet is a generalized communication technology. Anything you can think about communicating, it doesn't matter that it wasn't thought of when the thing was designed. Anything you can think of communicating can be done over this, because the internet is not for communicating something in particular. The phone network was built to communicate voice. The internet wasn't built to communicate anything. It was built to communicate everything. It's a general tool, okay? And the combined, you know, applications of computers and the internet are, of course, endless and transformative. How many people here use Facebook? Okay, like everyone. How many of you were using Facebook 10 years ago? Guaranteed no one, because it didn't exist 10 years ago. It was started less than 9 years ago. And most of you have only hopped on in the last few years, but you already can't imagine how you would live without producing complete personalized dossiers for the National Security Agency. You know, and this is amazing. No one thought of this when they built all the technologies this depends on, because they were general tools. So similarly, we're beginning to build a new capability, which is one of the more interesting general capabilities. I think the second most interesting thing, which I refer to as generalized manufacturing. It started in the 1940s and 50s with primitive computer numerical controlled milling. It's moving on now to things like 3D printing. How many people here know what 3D printing is? I don't have to tell you about it. Good. Okay. How many of you know what atomically precise manufacturing is? Tennyson, yes. And Faray and a few other people. Some people call it nanotechnology. I'll get into it in a moment. But what we're developing is the generalization of manufacturing, the construction of devices that are not built to manufacture something, but are built to manufacture anything. Okay, this thing is a 5-axis computer numerically controlled milling machine, and hopefully you can all see what it is doing. It is starting with a block of aluminum, and it is lowering a cutting bit into it. And what it is going to do is it is going to mill out an aluminum motorcycle helmet, which no one would really want, but it's sort of just a demonstration of the capabilities of the devices. And it's doing this without any human intervention. It's just starting with a block of aluminum, and it is producing the thing. And I don't have enough time to really show the whole video, but I think you're getting the idea of what this thing does, which is really goddamn amazing and impressive. This is no human hands, no human involvement. You take a design of what you want, you feed it into the machine spits it out. The same thing kind of like 3D printing, only in much stronger materials. So fully generalized manufacturing is you tell the machine what you want, and this is the end point of it, okay? 3D printing and CNC and stuff like that is not the end point. The end point is APM, okay? But anyway, fully generalized manufacturing means you tell the machine what you want, and if it doesn't violate the laws of physics, it spits out. And I am totally serious when I say that. I'm not exaggerating. I mean that literally. So this is what atomically precise manufacturing is about. This is a brief image from a simulation of an atomically precise bearing. It's a planetary gear, as you can see, which was simulated using molecular mechanics software. And we are slowly getting to the point, we are gearing up to the point. Now, by the way, all of you are made with variations of atomically precise manufacturing. All of you have strips of DNA inside you, which are turned into computer numerically controlled tapes called messenger RNA, which are fed through ribosomes, which produce atomically precise parts called proteins, which make up your body. And the reason that you are so much more interesting than a car is because you are made with atomic precision by atomic precision manufacturing. However, just as airplanes can do things that birds never were able to, human-generated and human-designed atomically precise manufacturing is going to be able to do things that are so far beyond what biology can do that it isn't funny. But the talk today is not about atomically precise manufacturing, though I will mention some things that interrelate with the rest of it. But this is another technology that's coming down the pike and is going to change things and is going to feed into what I'm talking about. The most interesting thing that's coming down the pike is a pair of things, and they're kind of in certain ways interchangeable. Artificial intelligence and intelligence augmentation, AI and IA. And they're kind of the flip sides of the same thing. They are indistinguishable at the edges. Another mosquito. Is the mosquito the state bird of New Hampshire? I have killed so many of them in the last couple of days. But anyway, intelligence augmentation, artificial intelligence are sort of generalized computation. Because computation as it stands right now, you have to be a programmer and you have to sit down and you have to tell the computer in breathtaking detail what you want it to do. Whereas if you say, you've got your shop up on the hill where you're cooking breakfast for people here at Porcfest, and you've got a friend who's helping you, you say to the friend, hey, can you do some pancakes for this customer? And he doesn't need to be given a detailed set of instructions about every way he has to move his arms. He figures it out. Intelligence means generalization of generalized computation, and it's kind of the last technology. Once you have that, you have everything. And we'll get to it in a minute. Part 3, limitations on the rates of change. So what limits the rate at which things change? Why is it that all new technologies don't appear at once? Why haven't we already built spaceships to go to Alpha Centauri?
Government.
There you go. But it turns out that although it's largely the government, no. So a slight impediment is resource limitations, but it's only a slight impediment. For the most part, as technologies get better, we use less energy, we use fewer materials, we use less in the way of materials, Resources doesn't limit things that much. Tools are a major impediment. If Homo habilis wanted to build any of the benches that you're on, which are in the back of the room, which are very low technology, okay, even if they wanted to build them completely out of wood, they didn't have the sorts of planes and hatchets and precise woodworking tools to do that. Even though, you can tell, you could have told someone, 30,000 years ago, by the time there were people just as intelligent as you, about a chair, with nice, smooth wooden surfaces, and they could have fully understood what it was made of because they dealt with wood all the time. They could never have built it. They didn't have the tools. You need the right tools to manipulate the materials, and you need the materials to make better tools, and it's a feedback loop. But the most important thing you need is people working on problems and thinking about them. That is the biggest limitation on the rate at which new things can happen. Okay, everyone can, you can think of 20 new apps for iPhones, in an hour if you're in the field, and even if you're not. You can think of all sorts of things. I would like there to be an X. I would like there to be, a little device that I can fit right here into my shower curtain to keep it from slipping. I would like there to be an app on the iPhone that tells me crowdsourced when, where the checkpoints are. There probably are 30 of those by now. I would like all sorts of things. But the thing that stops them from happening instantly is someone has to build them and someone has to think about how to build them. So if you look at aircraft design, to some extent, you need people to lift around aluminum and put it into the CNC machines to prototype stuff, but mostly you need engineers. This is just a random example. I'm picking some random examples. If you want to build more software, you need more programmers. If you want to do more scientific research, you need mostly researchers. Yeah, you need equipment, but we've got good ways of churning out equipment on mass production lines. Mostly, if you want to improve the world, you need minds. What if you can improve people's minds? What does that do to the rate of change? How many of you have ever seen this before? Okay. So I'm going to argue that you are all already subject to intelligence augmentation. You're sitting around at dinner and you cannot remember the name of that play. You cannot remember who the actor was in that movie. You can't remember if you have to go to the dentist tomorrow or not. And you get out your smartphone and you check an app or you check Google and you find the information. You are already no longer just you. You are now starting to be a hybrid organism. It's really primitive at this point. Really primitive, but even though it's really primitive, this has transformed the way people work, okay? You do not have to go back and forth to the library all day long if you're a researcher. You need to find out all of the papers in your subject. You need to find out, what the foreign exchange rate is for dollars to pounds before you go on your trip. You need to find out anything. You will know almost instantly. This is transformative. And we're going to find better and better ways of doing this stuff. We are going to eventually have direct interfaces between the machines and our minds. You're going to eventually not have a very strong distinction between what you know directly and what you can remember by searching the internet for it. And that's really goddamn cool. Also to some people scary, but extremely interesting. Okay, what if you can build more things that think? Constructing human beings is still done by a method that we've been employing for millions of years. It involves unskilled labor and often alcohol. But what if you can build more minds? What sorts of things can you do? How many people in the room recognize this device? Okay, for those of you that do not recognize what this is, which wasn't many of you, this is an autonomous car. These things have driven, I think at this point, over 500,000 miles on the roads of California without getting themselves into an accident. There have been a couple of points where they have been hit while legally stopped at stop signs and lights and what have you, which is what happens when cars are being driven around. But these things are better than human beings at driving cars. And there is no human, when these things drive around, there's no human being at the controls. Okay? If someone had told me when I was a little kid that they were going to be building cars that drove themselves, I would have said cool, but I would have also thought science fiction. Well, it's not science fiction anymore, okay? Okay, what is the best Jeopardy player in the world? You know, it's not Ken Jennings anymore. It's a machine called Watson, built by IBM TJ Watson Research. That's why they named it that. Bet you didn't guess. Okay? IBM TJ Watson also built a chess computer called Deep Blue that beat the best chess player in the world very handily. I would say that Deep Blue was still the best chess player in the world, except the chess machines have gotten better since then. We have self-driving cars. All of this is the tip of the iceberg. You know, it's just the start. Things are moving fast. You know, at some point in the not that distant future, we are going to be able to build things as smart as a person, as capable as a person, as capable of thinking as a person. I don't know how soon. I'm not going to predict exactly how soon. But the interesting thing is, once you can build something as smart as a person, you can build something smarter. And if you remember Moore's law, once you can build something smarter, the next year you can build something much smarter than that, and the next year you can build something yet smarter than that. And you don't have to be the thing doing it, because once we have things as smart as people, the smarter things can build yet smarter things, which can build yet smarter things, which can build yet smarter things. So how far can this be taken? Gedankenexperiment is a fancy German word for think about what you might be able to do. The thought experiment. So a fellow named K. Eric Drexler has done a lot of thinking about the limits of technology. He's actually the guy that invented the idea of atomically precise manufacturing. And Eric Drexler, in one of his books, as an offhand remark, says this, already having justified the possibility of doing it. You'll have to take my word, unless you're willing to read his books on your own, that he's right, that this is a conservative sort of idea. And by conservative, he means knowing only things that we are pretty damn sure you can do. This is straightforward to do. And what he was imagining was, let's say that you don't even try to design something per se. You just try to take something that looks pretty much like a human brain, but implement it as a simulation in atomically precisely built computing infrastructure, and you get something, and you can easily get something 1,000,000 times faster than a human being. 1,000,000 times faster. And that's something that's a little bit hard to grasp, so let's think of it in these terms. You could do a year's worth of engineering if you are a machine like that, a year's worth for a human being, every 7 seconds. Every 7 seconds, you can do a year's worth of engineering. You can do 1,000 years worth of engineering every 2 hours. And of course, you can build as many such devices as you want. You can build hundreds of thousands of them, you know, and stick them in, you know, in the cooling facilities you need, because running these things takes a lot of heat. You can do 1,000 years of engineering every 2 hours. You know, clearly by the end of year 1, you're not even going to be using the same hardware anymore. It'll be woefully obsolete long before that. And all of this assumes the silly sped up human brain model for how you build artificial intelligences, which is ridiculously stupid. So right now, we're used to the idea that change happens pretty damn fast. We're not used to the idea that thousands of years worth of engineering can be done in hours. And it won't stay thousands of years worth of engineering done in hours for very long, because the engineers will come up with much better ways to do it much faster. Now, I know often people will say to me things like, wait a minute, if you've got, how the hell will it do things like building prototypes and checking things? Well, you know, we've got very good simulation equipment now. We've also, once we have things like atomically precise manufacturing, you can build prototypes of things very, very, very fast. Very, 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 very fast. I think it's reasonable to think that you can actually do engineering at that rate, which means that the world becomes unrecognizable really, really fast. And that's what we talk about when we use the word singularity. So, can you understand the implications of millions of years of progress by things vastly smarter than humans happening on a daily basis? Can you? Can your dog meaningfully discuss the specs of the next iPhone? No. And in fact, the difference likely in intelligence between the things that will appear pretty quickly after we've got technologies like this and us is a lot bigger than the gap between you and your dog. It's more like the gap between you and ants. And I don't know about you, I've been able to train dogs, and there are certain dogs that actually can understand hundreds of words of human vocabulary. I don't think an ant can do that. So again, the world becomes not a little weird. It becomes deeply, deeply non-understandable really fast once we have technologies like this. So what's the singularity? The singularity is the point at which all the models you have break. You know, everyone thinks right now, you read a science fiction novel these days that takes place a few hundred years from now, and you've got people, and the clothing looks a little different, and they've got really cool gadgets, but you know, everything is kind of understandable. And that's, no. You know, being realistic, and the reason people aren't realistic about this, because science fiction authors, you know, are often the first people to understand things like this, is you can't write saleable fiction about things that you yourself don't understand, about things with motivations human beings don't understand, so you don't write it. But if you're thinking in terms of, you know, will we be fighting the state in 100 years? Will, you know, will people, you know, will people have better contraception? You know, will the world be quit thinking about that stuff. It's meaningless. I happen to be one of the few people in this community that believes that global warming is real, but I don't care. And the reason that I don't care is because I think that within 50 years we're going to have machines that we can launch that'll span the planet, that will change the composition of the atmosphere at will, at which point it really just doesn't matter. You know, and so we're worrying about the wrong stuff when we worry about global warming. There are much deeper and more interesting and much bigger things to worry about. So part 5 on this, whenever I start babbling to people about this, they always ask me this question, how soon? And my answer is always a variation on sort of, does it matter? And what do I mean by that? So it is deeply important to you and me as individual human beings when this happens, because it'll affect our lives. And that's true, and I'm kind of interested in whether or not I'll live to see this stuff or not. You know, I'm middle-aged, maybe I won't. But on the scale of the time span of human history, whether this happens in 30 years or this happens in 200 years, you know, 200 years is 1,000th of the time there have been human beings. It is, you know, it's a drop of water in the ocean. It isn't important. You know, on the scale of historical events, this is about to happen. Whether it's going to happen before you or I in particular die doesn't matter. It's going to happen almost immediately on the scale of human history. Okay, I'm almost at the end, and then you'll all be able to stand up and heckle me. And if none of you do, I am going to be gravely disappointed. Next thing, you know, which everyone always asks is, should we be worried about this? You know, the robots, they're going to come and take over the world, you know? And in fact, yeah, the robots are going to come and take over the world. You know, there's no two ways about it. You know, the desire to build things that are smarter than people is almost unavoidable, because things that are smarter than people are damn useful. And even if we don't build the things that are smarter than people, we are going to make ourselves into things that are smarter than people used to be. So should we be worried? Should we be upset about this? And when people ask me that, I always ask this question. Are you worried that your children will do better than you? And if you want your children to do better than you, then no, you shouldn't be worried. Now 2 million years ago, there was a Homo erectus or a Homo habilis, you know, somewhere in the Olduvai Gorge, chipping a stone tool and changing his future. And he probably had no perception of the fact that his distant descendants would not be even his species. You know, that they'd look vaguely similar, you know, but that they would be a totally different species. Now, should he have been worried that he was laying the seeds for the destruction of his entire race? No! No, it was good. His children turned into, and his distant great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren turned into something cool, which is us. You know, and we are going to turn into something cool, vastly cooler than we have now. And now clearly, if you're the sort of person who gets really jealous of your kid's success and your grandkids' success, and you definitely try to stop this from happening, not that you'll succeed. But if you think that it is nice to think that your kids, grandkids, great-great-great-grandkids may be things vastly smarter and more interesting than you are and vastly more successful, then there's nothing really to worry about. You know, the robots are our children, and again, I suspect that we're probably going to end up merging with our technology to a large extent, as we've already started to do, and that we, in fact, are going to end up being the robots. And the only question is whether or not, you know, precisely when it's going to happen, and you know, and in what order and all of that stuff, except I don't think that any of us are going to have a good handle on that. And I don't think anyone else will either until more or less the moment that it ends up happening. But I think it's pretty cool. So anyway, questions? Sure, give people a mic. Okay, so we will start with the, you know, with the subversive Frenchman in the back of the room, who I believe is on file as not liking the state. We know who you are.
Hello?
I don't, turn it on.
It's already on. Aha!
I don't think it's on. Can you check his mic?
That's okay, I can shout.
Yeah, but then the video won't have your question.
Hello? Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. So,
Yes.
what does this have to do with Porcfest and government? What will government be to these machines? Will they have a government or not? Or can we do something about it?
Well, what does it have to do with Porcfest? I don't know, really. You know, I just come up here and blather. You know, it's not really about anything, really. Mostly it's about me, really. There are certain things I worry about here and there in conjunction with this that are sort of Porcfest topics. I do worry about the possibility that someday there will be states that decide that having citizens is really just too much of a pain in the ass, and that they can get everything done without having any. You know, I do worry about what happens when technologies like this fall in the hands of statists rather than in the hands of people who are interested in advancing, you know, what free people and eventually free robots and free interstellar spacecraft can do. You know, but what does it have to do with Porcfest? I don't know. You know, you can throw a rotten tomato at me later. Next question. Yes, we seem to have, oh, wait, which of you was first? Do you know even? Well, we'll ask the guy in the front so we can even out the room and force the guy moving the video camera around to do work, because I'm sure he's enjoying that. Yes?
So that last answer that you gave, that said, you know, who is actually funding and developing this technology right now? Who's going to have control of it?
Everyone.
How expensive will it be for the average person? And do you think that maybe those statists that you mentioned, you know, the really rich people who got rich off of the state, you think they'll probably be able to afford it before everyone else, so they reap the benefits first, right?
Good question. Everyone understood that and heard it? So, okay, how many of you have iPhones? So, how many of you have talked to Siri on your iPhone? A number of you have. How many of you have called up your bank and had to talk with a voice recognition IVR system? A lot of you. And if you haven't yet, more and more of you are going to. Is this stuff affordable? I don't know. Are iPhones affordable? You know, You know, is this computer affordable? It's all about technology. Who's funding this? Everyone is funding this. If you're a company doing business right now, you want faster computers to design things, you want to build better products for your customers, and everyone is worrying about this and everyone is doing it. Everyone is involved. You are all implicated. We have all your names. You know, and if you're involved in the free market, you're involved in this one way or another. Everyone funds better technology. Everyone, if they have a business, tries to get better and better technology. The gentleman in the back in the red shirt, which says something about guns not killing people.
The government does.
Very good. Yes.
So the computers do math faster than people. They do chess better than people. They do Jeopardy better than people. They do driving better than people. Computers are currently the smartest computer is currently quantifiably dumber than you or I, right? No?
No.
So we can't tell how the period of time between a computer today and whatever period of time something is as smart as you or I.
So this is a fuzzy question. There are three parts of this question. Okay, so the first part is, are there computers that have as much computation power as human beings do yet? And I could go into how you can calculate this, and there are a number of interesting versions of this calculation out there. Hans Moravec did a really interesting version of the calculation maybe 20 years ago. But the answer is, there aren't desktop computers at this point that have as much computation power as the human brain. But there are clusters that absolutely certainly do at this point, big clusters. But just having as much computation power isn't interesting because computers are driven by software. You know, they're driven by instructions that tell them what to do, and at this point we don't yet know how to tell a computer to be intelligent. We're rapidly learning. That's why I mentioned things like the progress on self-driving cars, on things that can play Jeopardy, things that can play chess, etc. We are learning how to build the software. The other thing that's happening is, of course, that Moore's law means that computers are faster and faster and have more and more parts that do computation every year. I mean, a few years ago, people never got multi-processor desktop computers, and now if you buy a Mac laptop, it's got 8 processors, and in a few years it'll have 1,000. So everyone is getting more and more computation in front of them, which means more and more people who don't have budgets can experiment with writing software to do intelligent things. But yeah, we already more or less have the computation in hand. What we don't know is how to use it yet. But that's just a question of research and development. I personally think it's going to happen really fast. But even if it takes 200 years, it doesn't really matter on the scale of things. Next question. Michael Malice, because he'll ask something rude.
Thanks for the great talk, Perry. I really enjoyed it.
I'm sorry.
The question I had is, I see a lot of headlines that I never click from articles about how the singularity is this sci-fi fantasy and that it's nonsense. Can you talk about what some of the big criticisms are of this kind of framework and why they're wrong?
I am not the best person at making arguments I consider ludicrous. But what a lot of people say is, well, we won't be able to make AI. We won't figure out how to write the software. We can't really make machines as smart, that are intelligent the way people are because people are different somehow. That's the general flavor of the things. My counter argument to all of that is pretty straightforward. You can build simulations of neurons. Human brains are made out of neurons. We're getting better and better at scanning 3D objects at the microscopic level every year. Give it enough time, and even if we can't figure out the software on our own, we can just scan human brains, simulate them in computers. And I don't think people will actually do that as such. That's just certainly that's possible at minimum, so there's no question that we can do at least that. Yes, next question. Tennyson, maybe. And then try to snake back and forth going backwards.
All right. My question is, aren't there more pressing concerns, for example? If these things kind of seem like they're going to be rushing on to us, faster and faster, et cetera. But we have things like states and problems that exist right now. For example, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons that could probably annihilate all the industrial capacity that would actually build something like this, or all of the knowledge that's required to retain all of this type of stuff. So this is really cool, but where should we hold it in terms of priorities and things to think
I have
about?
no idea.
Okay.
So Tennyson's question was, so like there's stuff out there like the state, compared to the state, how important is this? Compared to my mortgage payment, how important is this? Compared to, compared to all sorts of things, how important is it? I don't know. It's really important in the long run. Maybe it's not important in the short run. Maybe it is. I think it's interesting. I think it's useful knowing about. You have to take it. Anyway, so I'll detach the cable for him. Okay, next question.
Hey, Barry. My question is, what will be the driving force that keeps us going towards the singularity when right now we have praxeology and human action and the free market creating incentives and motivation? What will be the incentives when robots or that sort of thing? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, it depends on how the robots are built, but I imagine that there are two views on this. There's the one view is that that we will consciously design the robots to have motivations, and the other view is that we can't help having the robots have motivations. But either way, the same rules apply, right? You've got purposeful action, you've got scarce resources. Economics still applies. It applies on a different level. Evolution still applies. It applies in a different level. Right now, evolution happens entirely, on the basis of genetic variation that's kind of hardwired in. This stuff can move through cultural evolution and deliberate design, but it's still evolution, the way that cultures evolve, the way the designs in the free market evolve, the way that businesses evolve. We still have the same pressures. There's nothing that says that it is morally better or worse for an AI to have motivations or to try to do things, but the ones that try to do things are the only ones that are going to be producing more of themselves and that we're going to see. So I think it's kind of unavoidable. Next person, next question. Right behind you, I think.
You talked about like AI and IA kind of interchangeably. I was just wondering if
they blend in at the edges in all sorts of ways.
Well, I guess still, I was wondering if you could comment on like if you think one might happen before the other.
I have no idea. I've been studying this stuff for a long time, and I worry about it deeply. And the only honest answer is I can pull out answers out of the air, but they are not well motivated. There isn't a lot of information behind them. I can't tell you. Maybe you can change it, though. I mean, the thing is that all of this is the product of human beings doing conscious work and research. So to some extent, it depends on what you and what other people end up doing. The sort of research you conduct, the products you build. Okay, next person. Is there a next person? There's a next person.
I'm just curious, when you use words like mind and thinking and engineering, what exactly you mean? Because in my mind, the bridge, like the gap that I'm having a hard time bridging is when you're talking about a machine doing engineering, I think of engineering being a result of creative activity of a human mind for human purposes. And I'm just not sure that, like, when we're talking about computing power, I understand how machines are going to surpass humans, but in terms of like creativity and things to serve human ends.
Okay, so here's my answer for that. Human beings are mechanisms. Okay, everything that's happening inside of your brain is as a result of mechanical, chemical, and electrical interactions following the laws of physics. We can simulate the laws of physics, so we can simulate human brains. So at very worst, we can build simulated human brains. You know, and is a simulation of a thought the same as a real thought? Is the simulation of is the thought about a unicorn a real thought because unicorns don't exist? You can get into all sorts of philosophical questions. But it's clear that we can build machines that think. And the reason we can build machines that think is because there is nothing going on in the things that we know about that think that is not ultimately underpinned by the rules of physics. It's understandable, it's parsable, it's simulatable. I think actually we will probably build intelligent agents without having to, drag along with it all of the, the tens of and hundreds of millions of years of evolutionarily conserved structures, most of which don't really serve lots of useful functions in the context anymore. But even if we can't, we can build things that think. And once you can build things that think, all the creativity, all of the thoughts, all of your aesthetics, all of the cool stuff you do, and if you're an engineer, all of the cool stuff you do in designing stuff is a product of your neurons working. If we can simulate neurons, we can simulate minds. Next, pass it over towards the back, actually, and then move it towards the front. Okay.
Is there a way to approach this sort of technological progression without the opinion of dystopian, sort of brought on by media such as like The Matrix?
I didn't quite catch the question.
While looking at this technological sort of progression, is there any way to approach it without the attitude of a dystopia?
I'm not a dystopian, so clearly there's a way. As I was saying at the end, I view this as an extension of everything else we've done. I don't think that it's dystopian that we have ovens. I don't think that it's dystopian that we have blenders, power drills, automobiles, the internet. These are more tools. These are more things to make us able to do more things, do them better, do them more interestingly. And as I said at the end, to say that you don't want this to happen is to say you don't want your children to do better than you. You don't want your children to be better, smarter, more interesting. Okay, let's take a couple more. I think the woman in the green shirt was waiting the longest.
Hello, I found your talk wildly stimulating. But I was born in the 20th century, and I think I'm still there. I'm just reeling, and I think some other people have asked the same question, but I'm having a hard time. So you've assured us that there's nothing to worry about, and I am just
I'm not sure there's nothing to worry about, but I don't think in the larger sense there's anything to worry about.
Okay, all right.
Look, there's always things to worry about. Guns, most people in this room kind of like guns. I know anyone watching on the internet and listening in on this might think that's very strange, but this is an event if you're watching the video later, where most people kind of like guns. But it turns out you can use guns to commit crimes and kill people. So, there are things to worry about every technology. And there's certainly things to worry about here. There's ways that all of this could go terribly wrong, But that doesn't mean that but the technology is neutral and can be used for wonderful things. It can also be used for terrible things. You can use a wearing blender to make a smoothie, and you can use it to torture someone by chopping their hand up. It's all in how you use the tools. In the end, the tools are neutral. It's in how people choose to use them. I happen to be optimistic, and I happen to think that the same things that keep most people from being violent bastards right now will keep them from doing bad things in the future. But, there can be no full assurance, and I would be lying if I said that I knew what the future would be like. Because I can't understand what the future is going to be like, and neither can you. Next person in line.
Hi, Perry.
Hello.
I'm just wondering if you yourself have submitted to a Turing test, and if not, how do we know you're not a robot?
Well, you don't. The question was, how do we all know that I'm not a robot? And you don't really have anything more than my say-so on it, and I'm a known liar. So I would just think carefully before you get in the car with me to drive back to New York. Okay, anyone else? We seem to have... I think the gentleman in the front has been waiting. Time is called. Okay, anyone who wants to talk to me, I'm here all week. I'll stand in the side and take questions. Well, I was expecting tomatoes. That's kind of a thrill. Thank you all so much.